Welcome to the Dynasty Dummies podcast. I am Zach Reed. I am joined by JMic at JMic Check, and we're back. We're back from the Expo in Canton, Ohio, the Midwest Fantasy Football Expo. We're back in your ears on the mics on your favorite podcast app. It's good to be back. JMic, it's good to see your face. I know this is an audio medium, so not everybody can see your beautiful mug, but I am really happy to see it. Even though I just saw you, I was able to get in, give you a couple of bear hugs this past weekend. It's still good to see your face, and it'll be fun to kind of figure out where we are in the dynasty landscape, where we are in the NFL landscape, and where we want to go with this show, because we don't necessarily have a plan. It's a little bit Marty McFly and Doc Brown, where we're going, we don't need roads.
What an absolute privilege it is to be able to get this thing started, and even more so to have time with you at the expo last weekend, and the laughs we shared, the time, it just continues to put into perspective the beauty of this community and the beauty of how this crazy game allows friendships and brotherhoods to flourish and grow. So I'm grateful for it, man. We laughed like crazy. We drafted a BBM team together on Underdog with several of our other good buddies. Shout out to all of them that we got to spend time with at the expo. But today, what I am very excited about, shout out to our guy Russ Fisher at Dynasty Outhouse. The non-point scoring season, the window's shut. That time has passed. It is now time. Let all rise for the point scoring season where we're chasing championships, where we're making trades, we're making pushes to try to be able to accomplish whatever our specific goal is for our team. So as we navigate conversations today, Zach, what's going to be most important for us is to think through how we live and operate with our teams with the end in mind. So as you think about where we're going in this whole process, in this whole journey, I'd love to hear your opening thoughts there before we really take off.
I love that idea, JMic, because I think oftentimes we set out, especially in fantasy football, but this is everything, where you don't necessarily have the goal in mind, the end game in mind. And if you don't, then your first steps may not be in the right direction. And if you're doing that, you're wasting time, effort, energy. You're not being as efficient as you possibly could. And in fantasy football, that could cost you, wins down the road or losses, depending on which direction you're headed, depending on what your team looks like, depending on what you're trying to accomplish in life. I mean, I know we just did the Fantasy Football Expo, and the destination ostensibly was the expo. And so that's we set off, and I put the GPS into Russ's house and then to Canton, Ohio. But looking back now, that wasn't really the destination. And if I had it in mind beforehand, I could have done a better job of, because to me, the Fantasy Football Expo, yes, you're going to Canton, Ohio, you're doing all of this stuff, you're doing the, all of the booths and all of the extraneous, the parties but it's really, to me, it's the people, it's the community. It was going to see Russ and you and Bob Gilchrist and John Bosch and Scott Fish and Chris Allen and Adam Wilde, and you just have this incredible community and this incredible tight-knit groups of people within the community that recharges me. And that's really the goal of that, and to be to be there and be a part of it, and to be, for me, I get to be a part of the Fantasy Cares booth, and that was amazing because that is another piece of fantasy football that has really spoken to me over the years, and being able to give back, and then to be able to be a piece of that, to be able to like represent and like talk to other people about why it matters. And if I had had all that in mind, could have done a better job in the 4 or 5 days that we were there, rather than just get there and go to the next event and go to the next event. And I think that tracks and translates with fantasy football, even though that's a trivial piece of what we're doing.
I love the perspective there, Zach, because that allows us to consider the importance of introspection, not just when we finish, but also before we even start, which brings us directly to the point that we're at now, week 2 of the preseason. We're currently recording this as the Browns and the Eagles are in the fourth quarter of their week 2-ish, week 2 preseason game, whatever we're calling this. This weird area in between, but the second preseason game for so many teams. We've got one more week, Zach, of preseason games, and then we're going to be to the actual season. So now that we're here and we're back in our saddle, we're back, seatbelt strapped on, we're ready for the ride of 2023 and all the things that this season will bring. Where do we even begin? And better yet, as we consider where we begin, with the idea of obviously operating with the end in mind, what do we consider to be some of the most important pillars or most important tenets as we're organizing, planning, and preparing for the season ahead?
So I think for me, and this is really your wheelhouse, because if there's anything that I have gained, well, I've gained a lot of things from you, a lot of knowledge, but if there's one thing that like stands out to me playing in leagues with you, it's nobody evaluates their own team nearly as well as you do, JMic. And I think that that's the place to begin. And you evaluate your team with that end game in mind. And so it could be even something as simple as revisiting your league rules, your scoring settings, your starting requirements, looking at what your team has and doesn't have. I honestly like to kind of take a directional look at individual players and also my team as a whole. So where I see these players in terms of points, and where I see these players in terms of their value arc, and you can get a pretty good feel for whether your team is looking like it should be a competitive team, but on its last legs, and needing to start thinking about pushing into a rebuild. And this is the time to think about those things, because if you're pushing into a rebuild in 4, 5, 6 weeks, everybody else is too. So if you can be ahead of the game, if you can set the market, if you can understand where you're headed now, take steps to head in that direction. And the same thing with, I mean, you may have a team, you may look at your roster and all of a sudden you think, wow, I got some talented players, but their value arc in terms of trade value in the way that we conceptualize, because it's not necessarily points value, but it's that future value. Maybe points value and future value is trending up. Maybe you're rostering Chris Olave or Garrett Wilson or Justin Jefferson, the young guys who are still young but are proven. And so I think that to me is a place to start. But also, I want to look at the other teams in my league. I want to evaluate the other teams in my league, because you're not evaluating your roster in a vacuum. You're playing against 11 other teams, 13 other teams, 9 other teams, whatever your league size is, and your team may not look like a contender until you look at the other teams in your league. Or you may look at your team and think, wow, I got this in the bag. And then you start looking, and maybe there are a couple of super teams in your league, and that may change the direction that you need to go in right now. But if you're not doing it at the beginning of the season, before the beginning of the season, you are digging yourself a hole.
Zach, I remember being a young man, actually even younger than that. I was being a young child. I've always been on the bigger side. I was Husky. I owned Husky as a youngster, 7, 8, Husky kid. And so I remember specifically, I would always like to wrestle with my friends and wrestle with people. And my mom would always tell me, John Michael, you are too heavy-handed to be playing with people like this. You have to make sure that you're taking care of other people. You can't simply do something because you want to do it yourself. You have to understand that there are other people who are also living in this world too. So you can't just do things just because you want to. And for the longest, I didn't understand it. It's like, well, if people are wrestling and they're laughing and like, what do you mean? What's the problem? They're enjoying themselves too. And one of the things that my mother used to always tell me, and I feel like it just rings true from when I was a young man to this point right now, she would say, John Michael, life is not about you. and so I would just be crushed when it's like, what do you mean? Like, it doesn't even make sense. And then as I've continued to live life, you start understanding, okay, what does it look like to be able to put the needs of others above yourself? What does it look like to be able to love your wife well, to be able to love your children well, to be able to be a good friend, a good coworker, and all these various things? And so I think through, when I think about where I start early in the season, Zach, or even at this point that we're at right now, like I look at my roster and I think it's not about my roster right now, right? Like you said, understanding the league rules, understanding how, we're obviously not just the premiums, but also what the schedule is for your league as it pertains to, are there trade deadlines? So do I need to be making moves earlier than the rest of my peers? If there's not a trade deadline, great. Like who actually makes the playoffs? What does that look like? How can I navigate the waivers? And I tend to be notoriously terrible at waivers because in the midst of my actual work week, like I don't stop to think, oh yeah, it's Tuesday night. Oh yeah, I got to get these in. And so when I do the assessing of, like you just said, not just what the league looks like in terms of the rules and the minutia, but also looking at other folks' rosters first. And if I have an understanding as to what the teams around me look like, that helps me, at least I'm finding of late, to not have that whole endowment effect thing where I use my own team as the North Star. I don't necessarily want my team to be the place that the solar system works around. I want it to be able to be a part of the solar system so that I understand where I need to be placing myself, and so I'm not at the center of that. So I think, man, I love where your perspective is with that. So as you continue forward, Zach, when you're thinking about taking all those things under consideration, where do you specifically find that you're spending the majority of your time? Because I think that's the thing. We think we have 2 more weeks left until the season starts, and that time's going to fly by because we're already here. And now the system churns week in, week out, game in, game out, takes fly, podcasts load, all the things. So where does that head for you?
So it depends on where I think my team is and where other teams in the league are. But the two places that I start, and especially right now, because we are in the full throes of NFL preseason. We're in the full throes of hot take season on Twitter and social media. And regular media, like you watch Good Morning Football, you watch Sports Center. It's all highlights of these players. Kenny Gainwell is going to be the starter, the unquestioned starter bell cow back for the Philadelphia Eagles. No, he's not. But right now he is. And so things like that, I try to see whether I have any of these darlings on my roster. And you know me, I'm the notebook guy. So if I can go back and look at tendencies of league mates and see, maybe Russ Fisher likes a good headline. He likes to get in early on these darlings, and maybe I can make a move with somebody like that where and again, you try to kind of get ahead of that with your rookie drafts. You kind of try to draft players that you think are going to pop, but you also have to understand that if you can go make a move now for an unproven, like trade away an unproven player and get assets back that are either the picks, and this is my word of the week is fungibility, but the picks that are uh able to be traded with anybody because everybody wants picks. And if you can trade away that player and get a pick that is either as valuable or more valuable, that the value curve, how things are going to play out, where in season the value is going to go down, and then when we come back to the rookie draft, the value is going to go up. So you have that. Or I also like to look in range, like if you're looking at ADP range, like 65 to about 90, and find players that I think are being really undervalued and target those players if I think I am a competitive team. And if you can do that now while they're still being undervalued, you can go attack somebody like Terry McLaurin. And yes, he's 28, but that's coming right into the prime of his career. I think Sam Howell is a very good quarterback. I think you see Terry McLaurin come back into, at least for point scoring, a really important factor in this season. I think he could be a top 16 wide receiver, something like that. Same thing with Calvin Ridley. Before we get into the Calvin Ridley hype and things all hit, George Kittle, where people are still disappointed because he was injured last year. If you can go find those players that you think will either give you points if you're a contender, or sometimes you can find players that are very obviously undervalued that will have a value bump. And so I like to do that. And I like to find out which teams have those players too. Because if I don't get them on the first run, in week 3, in week 4, where I reassess and say, okay, I got to make a move now, those are the teams that I'm going to approach already because I've done this research. I know where those players are. I know that if some of those teams have faltered, they're going to be ready to have a fire sale. And so again, it's not necessarily all about what's going on now, but you're doing the work now to set yourself up for success during the season.
It is literally, we are literally squirrels storing nuts away for the winter is what's happening there. And Zach, as you discussed that, I think one of the places that my mind goes is when I think about our good friend John Bosch at John Bosch FF on Twitter. And one of the things that Bosch taught me several years ago in this game is that every year what Bosch does is he looks at all of the positions and he determines, okay, we're before this 2023 season, where do I think that these players will be valued when we look at this time next year? And that allows, again, when we think about this idea, living with the end in mind, or operating with this idea that we're going somewhere, that everything isn't just static. We're not just sitting on right now in this moment. We're going somewhere. That is a process that I think can be wildly helpful for people because it allows them not only to think through the value pieces, but it allows for anyone who is managing a dynasty football team to really grasp the gravity of when I'm going into these places and looking at making trades or deciding whether or not I am a contender or how I want this season to look for me or how my peers look around me. You can start understanding how you want your roster to look even before you go into week 1. And so I think that your point, being very clear on understanding those value pockets and knowing the value curve per se, that is going to give folks a very clear perspective as to This is where I'm at right now. This is where I believe things are heading. And it allows us to play from an advantageous position of this is me forecasting. And even if I'm wrong, I know that I can pivot quickly as opposed to trying to play catch up throughout the rest of the year. With that said, Zac, as you continue to look at your teams, as you continue to assess players and figure out what the value pockets look like, I want to narrow down a little bit further. The idea of, am I contending? Am I rebuilding? How I declare that now, and how quickly, for those that may not have listened to us previously, we like to move pretty quick when we can. But how quickly is that something where you're willing to pivot and do work in terms of, abort. we got to go in a different direction. What does that process look like for you to determine that your status early and then pivot when necessary early?
Well, and you mentioned it, like it's early. Like we're talking, we want to be assessing and have self-evaluation within the first 3 weeks, because week 4 is the first week where we really have a lot of good information, where over 50% of the players who are already scoring in the top 12 at positions are going to finish as top 12 in position. So if you are attacking it as a contender, that you want to get in and get ahead of other people in your league. You want to be able to set the market. You want to be able to make those trades and acquire. And the same for if you're not a contender. If you're looking at it and you're like, okay, well, I am in big time rebuild. If you can do that early, you can set the market. You can go after the picks. And the other piece of that, and I think this gets lost sometimes when we do the high level analysis, because you hear a lot of, oh, you trade this player or trade that player or acquire, trade George Pickens or acquire It all depends on the price point, and it always does, but it's so hard to have a grasp on that from a high level if you're doing analysis on an individual league. And it's one of the things. So Peter Howard and I have been doing individual personalized rate my league podcast for individual leagues, and it's been really eye-opening to me, and I think beneficial for me as a fantasy player. And probably, and if you're listening, this would be something to go through. Is, again, this was a team by team breakdown of who was rostered, what the starting lineup construction looked like, what the bench looked like, and to be able to go through and look and go, oh man, you got 14 wide receivers on a 32 player roster. That's what you're allocating way too much space to players who are just clogging things up, when you could be going after running backs who, you have that elevator instead of the escalator. So the running back could be the next man up, whereas a wide receiver, that's not happening. They're coming in and playing, but talent drives targets. And so if you have a wide receiver that was not necessarily a starter, and then he comes in and gets a starting position, not necessarily earns it, but gets it based on injury, his talent is not necessarily driving the targets from that number one wide receiver who's out. And so to be able to understand that, to be able to look at what your team looks like, what your roster construction looks like, what the ideal roster construction looks like. So for me, I want wide receivers that I can start. I want running backs that, if I can get hammers at running back, that's great, because a lot of times people sell them too early. You're going to see people come off Saquon and CMC and because they're old, because they're worried about what happened to Dalvin. They're worried about what happened to Ezekiel Elliott already. not without some merit, but give me the points. I want the points, especially this season, because that's what we're looking at. If we're being competitive, we want those points. And if not, and we have some of those players rostered, wait a little bit. Wait a little bit till the points are being scored and then move them. But again, I think that getting ahead, especially right now, not everybody is in a dialed in, plugged in dynasty league. Not every single league is sitting here watching the Dynasty Dummies live or listening to DLF every week, or not everybody in every league. And so if you are doing that, and if you can get ahead of your league mates who aren't necessarily in dynasty mode yet, I think there's an advantage to be gained.
And so, Zach, I think that brings an immediate follow-up question. Again, in this season, we see the value of players rise and fall expeditiously. It happens fast. Jonathan Taylor is looking like he's going to hold out. What? Dropping him down. We have Josh Jacobs, who is holding out. We drop him down. Oh, Austin Eckler signed. Push him back up. Pick him up. What is it? We got a hitchhiker. Pick him up. So we consistently have these folks. Tank Dell does positive things in an NFL uniform, and people are going crazy. Now, the thing that I think that we need to ask ourselves, and I'm going to pose this to you, if the market is going to move and fluctuate so heavy, so fast, so quick in a game that we typically view from a long-term lens, why does all of this pre-work even matter? Why does it matter, Zach?
We're micro market miners, JMic. I want to be in early. I want to understand what players have potential to do this. Tank Dell is a great example of this. Tank Dell was a player that Peter Howard was in on early, is a player you could get in your third, fourth, sometimes fifth round of rookie drafts. And knowing that he's got a little bit of a profile, and knowing that some very vociferous, we'll say, I don't want to say loud, but
that's a good way to put it.
Yeah. Members of our community are on Tank Dell or Puka Nakua. Those players automatically have potential for that micro market jump. And the other way, you're talking with Jonathan Taylor and Josh Jacobs, and so those are players that you've seen produce. That if they're on the field, they're going to be fantastic. Those are players I want to buy in on. I don't want to buy in on risk at this point in the season. I bought in on risk in rookie drafts. Okay, so I spend my rookie capital, which is replenishable, which I get back every year, and I allocate that for risk. Like those are where I'm making the big bets. I can go and draft Justin Jefferson at 108 and hope. And if he hits, great. If he's N'Keal Harry, not great. But you're allocating those picks. When I'm making trades for players right now, I don't want to assume that risk. I want to go get players who are proven but depressed. So again, the Jonathan Taylor, Breece Hall. As soon as Dalvin Cook signed in New York, that was a boon for Breece Hall, because Breece Hall is one of the two running backs that I think you can fairly confidently say he and Bijan are going to be, for the next couple of years, very, very high level producers. They should get a ton of volume. They should be active in the passing game and in the run game. They're tied to, I hate to say this, the Jets are actually good. They're tied to offenses that want to use them to move the ball. And so, if you can acquire, and look, Jonathan Taylor, yes, I understand it's a scary situation. It's not an injury. He's not at the end of his career. It's a financial dispute. It's a Jim Irsay dispute. And
Zach, but his back, his back is messed up, Zach, and his
yeah,
ankle's still messed up.
yeah. That smells of if we can put you on the NFI, we don't have to pay you, and we can tweak it. Man, if I can be on the opposite side of Irsay in an argument, I'm going to be over there every single time. But that to me is a lot of people are, I think, playing this backwards, where they want to get in on the rookies and they want to take the camp hype and run with it. I think you assume a ton of risk there, especially with players who aren't even guaranteed to see the field in 3 weeks. So, Tank Dell's fine. He's great. But if you watch that play, if you watch the play that everybody was so excited about, like he fell down in the end zone and caught a tipped ball, which was nice. But that's not something that you're banking on. Like him separating and that sort of thing, great. But again, not necessarily high draft capital. He's a third round receiver. He was taken 69th overall. He's fine. But if I can sell on hype, if I can get out from underneath Tank Dell based on this hype, if I can get out from underneath Puka Nacua based on this hype, if I can get out from underneath players that I was taking in the third or fourth round of rookie drafts and get a second and be happy, or if I can parlay one of them into somebody like, and this is Michael Thomas. If I can parlay one of them into somebody like Michael Thomas, who, yeah, he's been hurt 2 years. He's been out with turf toe. But holy cow, if he's healthy and tied to Derek Carr, like that's going to be, yeah, I know.
People have turned the podcast off. People have just swerved in the road. They've pulled over into the median. Somebody's in a ditch somewhere. Michael Thomas, record scratch moment. And that's fair, Zach. And thank you for walking through that some, because we are, as much as we know rookie fever is a thing, camp hype buzz, Twitter highlights or X highlights, whatever you're referring to it as these days. I'll continue to call it Twitter. Twitter highlights, and where we see all these flash plays, they continue to carry so much weight, so much more so typically than all of the work that we've done for months or weeks or whatever the case has been when it comes to assessing what players can do. So I think it's important. We all understand we need running backs to win. If you really want to compete, we understand that we need proven commodities. But please, as much as we may fall into the sickness of rookie fever, it is also very important not to fall into the camp hype buzz bite.
It's so funny to me that for 9 months out of the year, we need to have a big sample size. We need to have all of this data to be able to make a decision. We need to have seen a player do it over and over and over again. But in the 3 months of training camp, that all goes out the window because somebody made a one-handed catch, or somebody made a diving play, or that. Like, it's so funny to me that Dynasty fantasy football can hold those two ideas in their brain simultaneously, where you got to have a long sample size, unless it was a super cool highlight when they're wearing shorts in August.
So if we've got our immunity from camp high buzz bites, what now, Zach? I feel like we've walked through a lot of processes over the course of this last 30 plus minutes that give us a very clear understanding of how I assess not only my own team, but also that of my league mates, how I determine the direction of my team, how I go about evaluating my team, making my own rankings, and again, thinking and operating with a destination in mind, and not just operating with the destination in mind, but what it looks like to be able to pivot quickly if I understand that the route that I'm going isn't quite what I had expected. We've talked through these things. And so now, Zach, again, we've got another week and a half of preseason. Is there anything else that matters that we're missing that we haven't touched on yet that we can say before we get into the rat race, before we start losing our minds about and forgetting all of the work that we've done, and we just say, hey, they're off? What else, if anything, do we need to consider?
So you've done all this work, you've laid all the groundwork for this, and now get comfortable, figure out how to trade in your league, because I think that like you can do all of this evaluation and you can figure out how the teams are set up in your league and how your team lines up within that framework. But if you don't attack trading and you don't understand how to approach the people in your league, and this goes back to understanding your league mates, it goes back to understanding tendencies, it goes back to understanding what the other owners in your league value on their roster, but also in trade. Like, to me, that is the final step of either getting uber competitive or, dialing it back, taking a year where, you may not win many games, but you're setting yourself up for the future. I think that's the final piece is, and look, full disclosure, I am and have not been perennially a very good trader. Like, it's difficult for me because I don't enjoy the negotiation. I don't enjoy the haggle. I want to make a trade, but I don't want all of the pieces that a lot of people enjoy. But I do a lot of listening, and I'm always of the opinion that you borrow brilliance from other people who do it better than you do. And so every time I talk about trading, it will always be Trade Addicts. It'll be Russ Fisher and Rocky Petrella Dynasty Outhouse. And it will always be the Dynasty Trades HQ with Shane Manila, Michael Sipes, and Jeremy Browen. Like, those are the two places that I go back to again and again and again to refresh, reset, and figure out, okay, this is how I need to go about attacking trades, because it doesn't matter if you evaluate your team well. It doesn't matter if you evaluate the other teams well. It doesn't matter if you have these rookies who are in micro markets in camp hype. It doesn't matter if you identify the players who are being undervalued, who should be points producers during the season, if you can't make moves to go acquire them.
Speak on it. Being able to tap into the markets, know the markets of your league, or even, call me crazy here, or even setting the market in your league. Again, we are proponents of understanding where you are early on and getting to the market before everyone else does, because when we can get even the slightest of edges of understanding where we are, you don't have to wait in line when four other people are trying to do the same thing that you're doing, whether that's really trying to contend or really trying to rebuild and sell off with pieces. So having a clear understanding of how those trade markets can be in your leagues can really take us to, I think, a different stratosphere of competing or setting ourselves up for whatever's next.
How many times have you been in a league DM when a trade goes down and somebody says, "Oh, you got him for that? I would have paid this."
Too many times.
Yeah.
Too many.
So get in early. Be that manager who sets that market, who got the player for undervalued, and be happy about it. Like, you're absolutely right. It's get in early, do your evaluation, do your due diligence now, so you can be early while everyone else is doing their evaluation. You've already done this. You already know you're ahead of the game. And now we can set what the market is. We can make some moves that put us in a position to be where we want to be headed.
Man, makes my heart happy, Zach. We're here. We're here. Games are right around the corner. The games that quote unquote matter. And obviously the Dynasty Dummies are here to be able to help all of us dummies, young and old, be able to navigate not only the season, not only navigating strategy, to try to be able to help thinking outside of what continues to be the popular, hottest topics that get volleyed back and forth. We want to be here to help talk through some of the things that really matter to us and the things that hopefully not everyone is constantly talking about, but even for those topics, we want to make sure that we're offering a perspective to you that, again, is not just something that has come from our brains, but something that things that we try, things that we think about, things that matter to us, that we're finding towards success. So Zach, we're off and running, and it feels good already, man.
Yeah, it's funny. The edges, they're not often in the middle. And so I think that's where we try to operate, is a little bit outside of what normally happens, a little bit outside of the straight up player evaluation or the recap show and that sort of thing. It's way more about the strategy and the psychology and those little edges, because if a lot of little things add up to a big thing, and this is true anywhere in your life, but it's also true when you're building rosters, when you're building a dynasty team. If you can find those little edges consistently, it adds up.
Zach is on Twitter at TacitAssassin13. I am on Twitter at JMic. Listen, I'm Zach. The expo is always a time over the last 4 years now that let me know, hey, this is real. Like it's real. It's happening, and the time is here. And again, I cannot thank you enough, just for the time that we get to spend once a year, to be able to laugh, to love, to share meals, to crack up, to make jokes, all the things, all of the catching up that we get to do over the course of 2 days. We live a lot of life together at like breakneck speed, just to be able to make sure that we tap in. So thank you again, just for being an awesome brother, man. I love you dearly, and I'm grateful for you. And I'm looking forward to riding again with you here on the Dynasty Dummies. So final words are yours.
Oh, absolutely. Like that. That's my favorite. It's that little condensed what actually matters. And I love and appreciate you and the time we get to spend with each other and every week. And it's nice we get this, and we have some people join us too on our journey. To me, it's fantasy football is great, but it's about the people. The expo is great. It's about the people. You forget, you kind of think you're the main character in your own story, and then if you can step back and see how many other people are playing a part in that story and our main characters, you're better off. We're better off. And again, like for me, the fantasy cares just absolutely illustrates exactly that, where we can take disposable income as this huge community, as this massive entity, and put it toward good use, put it toward Toys for Tots, or the JDRF, the Type 1 Diabetes Foundation, Research Foundation. Like, we can make a difference in other people's lives in real life through fantasy football. It's fantastic. Like I this game has done so much for me and so much for so many people, and it's amazing because it's just this stupid little game. It's a game about a game. Like, it's this little flippant, it doesn't even matter, but it matters so much. So appreciate you listening. Appreciate you watching. If you came to hang out, and we'll catch you next week. This has been the Dynasty Dummies. I gotta find that button because it's up here.